The stagecoach door swung open, and Clarissa Montgomery tumbled out into the frozen January air of Nome, Alaska, her voluminous skirts catching on the step as she struggled to find her footing on the ice-slicked ground. The year was 1899, and the gold rush had transformed this desolate coastline into something resembling civilization. Though the wind howling off the Bering Sea suggested nature had other opinions about mankind's ambitions. She stood there shivering, her ample frame wrapped in layers of eastern fabrics wholly inadequate for the Alaskan frontier, her face pale with cold and something deeper, something that looked like pure terror. Oliver Quinn watched from the doorway of his modest ranch house, situated just outside the main sprawl of Nome, where he raised hardy cattle and traded supplies with prospectors. He had been expecting a mail-order bride, yes, but the woman before him looked nothing like the delicate porcelain doll from the daguerreotype she had sent 3 months prior. That woman had been slender, confident, smiling. This woman was substantial, trembling, and looked ready to bolt back into the stagecoach despite having traveled 3,000 miles to get here. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins during the journey, whipping around her round face in the bitter wind. Her green eyes, wide with fear, darted from the sparse buildings to the white expanse beyond, then finally landed on him. Oliver descended the 3 wooden steps of his porch, his boots crunching in the snow. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. At 29, he had built a life here that was comfortable if lonely. He approached slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse, and stopped a respectful distance from where she stood frozen beside her trunk. "Miss Montgomery." His voice was gentle despite the wind trying to steal it away. She nodded, unable to speak through her chattering teeth. Ice crystals were forming on her eyelashes. "Let me thaw your worry away," he said, reaching out a gloved hand. "Come inside before you freeze solid. We can talk by the fire." She stared at his hand as if it might burn her, but the cold made the decision for her. Her fingers, numb inside thin gloves meant for Boston winters, not Alaskan ones, found his palm. He pulled her gently toward the house while gesturing to the stagecoach driver to bring her trunk. The driver, old Pete Hutchins, who made the run from the port 3 times weekly, gave Oliver a look that clearly said good luck with that one, before hefting the heavy luggage. Inside, the warmth hit Clarissa like a physical thing. The house was simple. One large room that served as kitchen and living space with a bedroom visible through a doorway and a loft ladder leading upward. A cast iron stove radiated blessed heat, and Oliver guided her to the rocking chair nearest it. She collapsed into it, still shaking, eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. "I will put coffee on," Oliver said, moving to the stove. "You need something hot in you." Pete dragged the trunk inside, tipped his hat, and departed quickly, clearly wanting no part of whatever awkward conversation was about to unfold. The door closed behind him, and suddenly the silence between Oliver and Clarissa was deafening despite the crackling fire. Oliver busied himself with the coffee, giving her time. He had questions, certainly. The photograph had obviously been old, or perhaps not of her at all. The letters she had written were educated, articulate, but had mentioned nothing about her size or her apparent terror of, well, everything. But he was not a cruel man, and whatever had brought her here desperate enough to marry a stranger, it was clearly not a simple story. Clarissa finally found her voice, though it came out small and brittle. "I imagine you want to send me back." Oliver turned from the stove, surprised. "Why would I do that?" "Because I am not what you expected." She gestured at herself, her face flushing with shame. The photograph I sent was from 5 years ago before everything changed. What changed? Oliver poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought them over, handing her one before settling into the chair opposite. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. My father died. He left debts I knew nothing about. The house, everything went to creditors. I went to live with my uncle. She paused, swallowing hard. He was not a kind man. His wife fed me constantly, pushed food at me at every meal between meals. I realize now she was trying to make me unmarriageable to keep me dependent on them, working in their house like a servant. Oliver's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. I grew larger and larger. When I protested, my aunt said I was ungrateful, that I should be thankful for the food. My uncle said no man would want me anyway, that I should accept my lot. I lived like that for 3 years. Tears began sliding down her round cheeks. Then my cousin found your advertisement. He showed it to me mockingly, said even a desperate Alaska cowboy would reject me. But I wrote to you anyway. I had saved a little money from mending work I did for neighbors. I sent you my old photograph because I was a coward, because I thought if I could just get here, just escape, maybe you would let me work for you, or I could find some other situation. I did not expect kindness. I have not known it for a very long time. The confession hung in the air between them. Oliver sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. She was not looking at him, but rather at the fire, her profile illuminated by its glow. Despite the extra weight, despite the fear in her eyes, he could see something else there too. A kind of desperate courage, the sort it took to travel alone across a continent on nothing but hope. How old are you? He asked. 23. My last birthday was in November. And you really want to marry a stranger and live in Alaska? The question was not unkind. She finally met his eyes. I want to be somewhere I am not a burden or a joke. I want a chance at a life, even if it is a hard one. I can work. I know I do not look it, but I am strong. I can cook, clean, so. I helped my aunt run her household. I am not educated in fancy things, but I can read and figure numbers. And I will not complain about the cold or the isolation. She paused. But I understand if you want to refuse me. I deceived you with that photograph. You would be within your rights to send me back. Where would you go? The question clearly startled her. I do not know. Then seems foolish to send you back to nothing. Oliver stood and moved to the window, looking out at the white landscape. I will be honest with you, Miss Montgomery. I did not advertise for a wife because I am particular about beauty. I am alone here. The work is hard. The winters are brutal. Most women will not even consider Alaska, let alone a ranch outside Nome where the nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. I wanted a partner, someone to share the burden and the life. Your size does not frighten me. Your fear does a little, but I imagine that will pass once you realize I am not your uncle. He turned back to face her. So here is what I propose. You stay. We spend some time getting to know each other properly, as we should have done through honest letters. If after a month you want to leave, I will pay your passage to wherever you want to go and give you enough money to start fresh. If after a month you want to stay, we will marry properly and build this life together. Does that seem fair? Clarissa stared at him as if he had sprouted wings. You would do that? Give me a choice. Every person deserves a choice, Oliver said simply. I will not force you into anything, and I will not hold the deception against you. Desperation makes people do desperate things. God knows I have done my share of questionable acts to survive. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands and stood. Before Oliver realized what she intended, she had crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. He stood rigid for a moment, surprised, then slowly brought his arms around her substantial form, patting her back awkwardly. "Thank you," she gasped between sobs. "Thank you, thank you." "Now then," he said gently, "that is enough of that. You are exhausted from traveling. Let me show you the bedroom. You will sleep there, I will take the loft." "I cannot take your bed," she protested, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "You can and you will. The loft is plenty comfortable and you need proper rest. Tomorrow we will get you fitted with appropriate clothing for the climate. Those Eastern things will get you killed out here." He showed her to the bedroom, a simple space with a sturdy bed covered in furs and wool blankets, a washstand, and a trunk for clothes. She looked around it as if it were a palace. "There is water in the pitcher. It might be a bit cold, but I will heat some for you if you want to wash properly." "Cold is fine," she said. "I am so grateful, Mr. Quinn." "Oliver," he corrected. "If we are to be married, might as well use first names." "Oliver," she repeated, testing the name. "I am Clarissa." "Pretty name," he nodded. "I will leave you to rest. Supper will be in a few hours. Nothing fancy, just stew, but it is hot and filling." After he left, closing the door behind him, Clarissa sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shuddering breath. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something unfamiliar blossoming in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. The next morning, Clarissa woke to the smell of frying bacon and coffee. Pale winter sunlight struggled through the window. She had slept in her chemise, having nothing else suitable for sleeping, and her trunks were still mostly unpacked. She dressed quickly in the same traveling clothes from yesterday, which were wrinkled and road-worn, and ventured out into the main room. Oliver was at the stove, working a large cast-iron skillet with practiced ease. He glanced up when she emerged and nodded a greeting. "Morning." "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," she admitted. "The bed is very comfortable." "Good." He slid bacon onto 2 plates already laden with eggs and thick slices of bread. "Eat up. We have a busy day. Need to get you to the general store for proper winter gear." They ate in companionable silence. Clarissa found herself sneaking glances at him. In the morning light, she could see the weathered quality of his skin, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the capable way his hands moved. He was handsome in a rugged way, nothing like the soft gentleman of Boston, but there was something solid and reassuring about him. After breakfast, Oliver hitched up his wagon, a sturdy affair pulled by 2 massive draft horses that looked almost as wide as they were tall. He helped Clarissa up onto the seat, and they set off toward Nome proper. The town was a strange collection of hastily constructed buildings, tents that had somehow survived the winter, and a few more permanent structures. Gold seekers and merchants mixed with native Inupiat people, creating a chaotic blend of cultures and languages. Oliver pulled up in front of a store with a hand-painted sign reading Dennison's General Goods. Inside, a woman of about 40 greeted them warmly. She had gray streaking her blonde hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Oliver Quinn, as I live and breathe," she said. "And who is this?" "Margaret Dennison. Meet Clarissa Montgomery. My intended arrived yesterday." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained genuine. "Welcome to Nome, dear. I imagine you need some proper clothing." "Everything she has is Eastern," Oliver confirmed. "She needs a complete outfit for Alaska winter." What followed was an extensive outfitting session. Margaret brought out wool skirts lined with flannel, thick blouses, a heavy coat made of sealskin traded from the Inupiat, boots lined with fur, proper gloves, scarves, and a hat. Clarissa kept protesting the expense, but Oliver waved her off. "Cannot have you freezing," he said simply. "Consider it a practical investment." The problem was finding things that fit. Margaret's standard sizes were too small for Clarissa's frame, and the process of finding alternatives was mortifying for Clarissa. who stood red-faced as Margaret measured and clucked her tongue and pulled out larger options. But the older woman was kind about it, never making Clarissa feel judged, and eventually they assembled a workable wardrobe. "Now these will keep you alive out here," Margaret said, folding the last item. "Alaska does not care about fashion, only function." While Oliver settled the bill, which made Clarissa's eyes water when she glimpsed the total, Margaret pulled her aside. "Oliver Quinn is a good man," she said quietly. "Lost his wife 4 years back in childbirth. Baby too. Nearly destroyed him. He buried himself in work in building that ranch. This is the first time I have seen him bring anyone around, so I imagine you are special." Clarissa felt her heart clench. "I did not know." "No reason you would. He does not talk about it, but I wanted you to know so you understand if he seems cautious. He has been hurt deeply, and he is not a man who hurts easy." Back at the ranch, Clarissa changed into her new clothing, marveling at the warmth. The wool and fur were heavy but comforting, and for the first time since arriving, she felt protected from the brutal cold. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Oliver woke before dawn to tend his small herd of cattle, hardy beasts bred to survive the Alaskan climate. Clarissa would rise and make breakfast, pleased to find his kitchen well stocked if simply provisioned. They would eat together. Then Oliver would return to outdoor work while Clarissa tackled the house. It became clear quickly that Oliver, living alone, had let certain domestic matters slide. The house was clean enough but lacked any warmth or personality. Clarissa began small changes, organizing the shelves more efficiently, mending his clothes which were worn and often torn, making curtains from fabric she found in her trunk. Oliver never commented on these changes, but she noticed him looking at the new curtains with something like pleasure. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. These conversations were halting at first, both of them unused to companionship, but gradually they found their rhythm. Oliver told her about coming to Alaska 8 years ago, fleeing memories of his first wife Sarah, who had died at only 19. Leaving him shattered. He had wandered north, looking for a place remote enough to match his grief, and found Nome just as the gold rush was beginning. "I had no interest in gold," he said one night, whittling a piece of wood into the rough shape of a bird. "But I saw opportunity in the people chasing it. They needed food, supplies, fresh meat. I knew cattle, knew ranching. So I built this place, brought in stock that could survive the winters, and made a life." "Do you miss her?" Clarissa asked softly. "Your first wife." Oliver was quiet for a long moment. "I did. For a long time the missing was all I had, but grief either kills you or you learn to carry it. I learned to carry it, and eventually it got lighter. I will always remember Sarah, but I am ready to live again. That is why I sent for a wife." Clarissa shared her own story in more detail. The happy childhood before her father's death. Her mother, who had died when Clarissa was only 12. The slow degradation of her life under her uncle's roof. Oliver listened without interrupting, his face darkening when she described the cruelties, small and large. "They made me feel like my size was a moral failing," she said. "Like I was gluttonous and lazy, when in truth they forced food on me and forbade me from leaving the house for exercise or fresh air. My cousin would laugh and call me pig, whale, cow." "Words from small people," Oliver said. "Your size tells me nothing about your character. Your actions do. And you have been nothing but hard-working and kind since arriving." The simple statement made her eyes burn with tears. She had not realized how much she needed to hear something like that. As the month progressed, Clarissa found herself growing comfortable, then content, then something more. She noticed the way Oliver's rare smiles transformed his serious face. The gentle way he handled the cattle and the horses. his patience when teaching her how to do various tasks around the ranch. The way he always served her first at meals, always asked if she was warm enough, always treated her with respect and consideration. For his part, Oliver found himself looking forward to the end of the workday, to coming inside and finding Clarissa there, a fire going, something savory on the stove, her face lighting up when he entered. She had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt safe. She sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs, her voice clear and pretty. The house felt like a home again instead of just a shelter. The month was almost up when the first real test came. A blizzard rolled in from the Bering Sea, one of the brutal storms that could last days and bury everything under several feet of snow. Oliver had seen it coming and prepared, bringing the cattle into the reinforced barn, stocking extra wood and provisions in the house. When the storm hit, it was with a ferocity that shook the walls. Clarissa stood at the window, watching the white wall of wind and snow, her face pale. "I have never seen anything like this." "Alaska winter," Oliver said, banking the fire higher. "We will be stuck inside for 2, maybe 3 days. Good thing we get along." But as the hours passed, the storm seemed to worsen rather than abate. The wind howled like a living thing and snow piled against the door. The temperature inside dropped despite the roaring stove. Oliver pulled out every blanket and fur, building a kind of nest near the heat. "We should stay close to the stove," he said. "Conserve warmth." They sat bundled together, not quite touching but near enough to share heat. As night fell and the storm raged on, Oliver told stories to distract Clarissa from the frightening sounds outside. Tales of his childhood in Montana, of learning to rope cattle from his father, of the time he had been chased by a bear and had to climb a tree and stay there for 6 hours. "I was 14 and thought I was invincible," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "That bear taught me otherwise." Clarissa laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I cannot imagine you as a foolish boy. You seem so competent at everything." "Competence is just survival with practice," he said. "You are competent too. You have survived things that would break most people." She looked at him in the firelight, at the sincerity in his dark eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. "Oliver, the month is nearly up. I know." His voice was quiet. "I do not want to leave." He turned to face her fully. "I do not want you to leave either. These weeks with you have been, well, I have been happy. I had forgotten what that felt like." "I am happy too," she whispered. "Happier than I have ever been, I think. Even in the good times before, I was always worried about something. Here with you, I feel safe. I feel valued." Oliver reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, and they sat like that, hand in hand, as the storm raged outside. "Then stay," he said. "Marry me, Clarissa. Be my partner and my wife. I promise I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy." "Yes," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, Oliver, I will marry you." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, tucking herself against his solid warmth. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other as the blizzard screamed its fury at the walls that sheltered them. When the storm finally blew itself out 3 days later, the world was transformed into a white wonderland. Snow had drifted against the house up to the windows on one side. Oliver had to dig a path to the barn to check on the cattle, who had weathered the storm with bovine indifference. As soon as the trails were passable, Oliver hitched the wagon and they drove into Nome to find someone to perform the marriage. There was no proper church yet, but a Methodist circuit preacher named Reverend Thomas happened to be in town, delayed by the same storm. He agreed to marry them that very afternoon in Margaret Dennison's store, with Margaret and her husband Paul standing as witnesses. Clarissa wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out her eyes, and Oliver had cleaned up and put on his only suit, slightly moth-eaten but respectable. The ceremony was simple, brief, but when Oliver slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and the reverend pronounced them man and wife, Clarissa felt something profound settle into place. Oliver kissed her gently, a soft press of lips that held promise of more to come, and she was married. Margaret insisted on hosting a small celebration, bringing out cider and sandwiches, and a cake she had made for another customer who had left town. It was an impromptu wedding reception with only 4 guests besides themselves, but Clarissa could not have been happier if it had been a Boston society ball. To the newlyweds, Reverend Thomas toasted. May your love grow deeper with each passing season, and may you find joy even in this harsh land. That night back at the ranch, Oliver carried Clarissa's few remaining belongings from the bedroom to the loft. She watched, confused, until he explained. I have been sleeping up there all month, but it is not fitting for a married couple. The bedroom is for both of us now, if you are willing. Clarissa felt her face heat but nodded. They prepared for bed with shy awkwardness, changing in separate spaces and meeting under the heavy quilts and furs. Oliver pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I am glad you came here, he said into the darkness. Glad you were brave enough to take that chance. I am glad you were kind enough to let me thaw, she replied. Remembering his words from that first frozen day, he chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. We thawed each other, I think. Their marriage developed slowly, built on the foundation of friendship and respect they had established during that first month. The physical intimacy came gradually, both of them learning each other's bodies and preferences with patience and care. Oliver was a considerate lover, attentive to her needs, and Clarissa found herself blossoming under his touch, shedding the shame her aunt and uncle had laden her with. As winter deepened into the heart of the Alaskan darkness, with only a few hours of dim light each day, they created their own warmth. They would spend long evenings by the fire, Oliver reading aloud from his small collection of books while Clarissa sewed or knitted. She was making a quilt, piecing together scraps of fabric into a pattern of stars, something beautiful to brighten their home. One evening in late February, a knock came at the door, surprising them both. Visitors were rare in the best of times, unheard of in deep winter. Oliver answered cautiously, hand near the rifle he kept by the door, but relaxed when he saw it was Joseph Kalak, an Inupiat man who lived about 5 miles north with his family. Joseph, come in out of the cold, Oliver said, ushering him inside. Is everything all right? Joseph, a man of about 40 with weathered features and kind eyes, nodded gratefully and entered. My wife's sister. She is having a baby. It is not going well. I remember you said your wife came from the East, might know about doctoring. Clarissa stood immediately. I am not a doctor, but I helped deliver 2 of my cousin's babies. I can try to help. Within minutes, they were bundled into Joseph's larger sled, pulled by a team of dogs, racing across the snow under a sky brilliant with stars and the shimmering green curtains of the aurora. The trip took nearly an hour in the dark, but finally they arrived at a house built partially into the earth, warm and snug despite the cold. Inside, a young woman was in the midst of a difficult labor, attended by several other women who looked worried. Clarissa assessed the situation quickly. The baby was breech, and the girl, who could not be more than 18, was exhausted and frightened. What is her name? Clarissa asked. Amka, Joseph replied. Clarissa knelt beside the girl, taking her hand. Amka, I am Clarissa. I am going to help you, all right. But you need to trust me and do exactly as I say. Over the next 2 hours, Clarissa worked with calm efficiency, drawing on everything she had learned from the midwife who had attended her cousin, and from the medical book she had studied out of curiosity. She managed to turn the baby, a delicate and dangerous procedure, and coached Amka through the final pushes. When a baby boy finally emerged, wailing lustily, the relief in the room was palpable. Clarissa cleaned the baby and placed him in his mother's arms, then tended to Amka, making sure the afterbirth came properly and there was no excessive bleeding. Only when she was satisfied that both mother and child were stable did she sit back, exhausted. The women of the household embraced her, speaking in their language but clearly expressing gratitude. Joseph pressed her hands between his own. "You saved them both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We will not forget this kindness." Oliver, who had waited outside with the men as was proper, brought her out into the cold air when she finally emerged. "You did well," he said quietly, pride evident in his voice. "I was terrified the whole time," she admitted, "but I could not let that girl suffer if I could help." The family insisted they stay the remainder of the night, providing furs and a warm corner to sleep. In the morning, they fed Oliver and Clarissa a breakfast of fish and bread, and Joseph's mother, a tiny woman with a face like carved driftwood, presented Clarissa with a beautiful pair of mucklucks, boots made of sealskin and caribou hide, decorated with intricate beadwork. "For the healer," she said through Joseph's translation, "may they carry you safely through the snow." Clarissa accepted them with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity. On the journey home, she was quiet, processing the intensity of the night. "You were remarkable," Oliver said, breaking the silence. "Calm, capable, confident. You saved 2 lives last night." "I only did what needed doing," she said, but she felt a glow of pride. For the first time, she had been valuable not for her domestic labor but for her skills and knowledge. It felt good. Word spread of the difficult delivery Clarissa had managed, and over the following weeks, she found herself being called on by other women in the scattered community around Nome. Some were miners' wives, others native women, a few saloon girls who had nowhere else to turn. Clarissa helped where she could, learning as much as she taught, and gradually built a reputation as someone who could be trusted in medical matters. It gave her a purpose beyond the ranch, a way to contribute to the community. Oliver supported her fully, driving her to patients when needed, never complaining about the interruptions to their routine. He was proud of his wife, and it showed in the way he spoke about her to others. As spring approached and the days began to lengthen, the landscape transformed. The snow started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. The cattle, let out of the barn, gamboled with evident joy at having space to roam again. Birds returned, filling the air with calls and song. Clarissa had never experienced a winter so harsh or a spring so welcome. One April morning, she woke feeling queasy. She attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for several days, always worst in the morning, she began to suspect the truth. A month later, when her courses failed to arrive for the 2nd month in a row, she was certain. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted a child, wanted to build a family with Oliver, but she could not forget what Margaret had told her about his first wife dying in childbirth. Would he be happy about this news, or would it bring back painful memories? She waited until after supper one evening, when they were sitting outside watching the sunset, to tell him. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, reflecting off the remaining patches of snow. "Oliver, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, alerted by the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, I am quite well. I am with child." She watched his face carefully, trying to read his reaction. For a long moment he was perfectly still, then his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "A baby." His voice was rough. "Yes, I am about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late November or early December." Oliver stood abruptly and walked a few paces away, his back to her. Clarissa's heart sank. He was upset, remembering his lost wife and child. She stood to go to him, to apologize, though she knew it was illogical, but before she could speak, he turned back. Tears were streaming down his face, but he was smiling, a huge, unrestrained smile she had never seen before. "I am happy," he said, his voice breaking. "I am so happy, Clarissa. I thought I would never have this again, never dare to hope for it. I am happy and I am terrified, but mostly happy." She went to him then, and he swept her into his arms, holding her close. They stood like that as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds, facing an uncertain future together. "I will not lose you," he said fiercely. "Not you, not this baby. We will do everything right. You will see a proper doctor. We will prepare." "There is no doctor in Nome," she said gently. "Just a barber who sometimes sets bones and treats injuries." "Then we will bring one here," Oliver said. "Or we will go to a place that has one when the time comes. I will not take chances with your life." Over the following months, Oliver became almost obsessively protective. He insisted Clarissa rest more, tried to prevent her from lifting anything heavy or working too hard. She tolerated this for about a week before sitting him down for a frank discussion. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said. "Women work through pregnancy. I helped birth Amka's baby while you were snowed and outside. I am strong, Oliver. You need to trust that." "I trust you," he said. "It is the rest of the world I do not trust." "Then trust that I will ask for help if I need it," she said, taking his hands. "I understand your fear, I do, but I cannot spend the next 6 months being treated like an invalid. It will drive me mad." They reached a compromise. Clarissa would continue her work, but avoid the most strenuous tasks and the longest trips to patients. Oliver would check in with her frequently, but try not to hover. It was not perfect, but it worked. As summer arrived, transforming Alaska into a land of midnight sun and wildflowers, Clarissa's belly grew. She felt the baby move for the first time in late June, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp with wonder. Oliver pressed his hand to her stomach that night, waiting patiently until he too felt the tiny kicks. "Strong," he murmured. "Takes after the mother." They began preparing for the baby in earnest. Oliver built a cradle from smooth pine, carving animals into the headboard with surprising artistry. Clarissa sewed tiny clothes, made blankets and nappies, stockpiled supplies. Margaret became a frequent visitor, bringing gifts and advice, sharing stories of her own 3 children, now grown. "Labor is hard," Margaret said frankly one afternoon as they sat shelling peas. "Anyone who says otherwise is lying, but it is also natural. Your body knows what to do, trust it." "I am more worried about Oliver than myself," Clarissa admitted. "He is so afraid something will go wrong. Course he is. He has been through this before and lost everything. But you are not Sarah, and this baby is not that baby. Every pregnancy is different. He will see that when the time comes." In late August, a ship arrived in Nome bringing supplies and a new resident, a doctor named James Whitley, sent by a medical mission to provide care to the growing population. He was a young man, fresh from medical school in Philadelphia, idealistic and slightly overwhelmed by Alaska. Oliver practically dragged him to the ranch the day after his arrival. Dr. Whitley examined Clarissa thoroughly, pronounced her and the baby healthy, and agreed to attend the birth when the time came. Oliver paid him a substantial fee upfront to ensure his availability, which embarrassed the young doctor but which he accepted, recognizing the fear driving Oliver's generosity. "Your wife is strong and healthy," Dr. Whitley told Oliver. "There is no reason to expect complications. I will be here, and I will do everything in my power to ensure a safe delivery." The reassurance helped, though Oliver remained anxious as autumn arrived and Clarissa grew large and awkward. She found it harder to move, tired more easily, but remained in good spirits. The baby was active, kicking so strongly sometimes that Oliver could see the movements through her dress. "This one is going to be a handful," Clarissa said one evening, rubbing her belly ruefully after a particularly vigorous kick to her ribs. Like his mother, Oliver teased, earning a playful swat. They had decided to be surprised by the baby's sex, though everyone had opinions. Margaret was convinced it was a girl. Joseph thought boy. Clarissa did not care either way, just wanted a healthy child. Oliver claimed the same, but she sometimes caught him looking at the cradle with a soft expression that suggested he was imagining a son to teach and guide. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the world in white. Clarissa watched it from the window, remembering her arrival almost a year ago, frozen and frightened, stepping off that stagecoach into an unknown future. So much had changed. She had changed, not just in body but in spirit. She was stronger now, more confident, loved and valued. The fear that had defined her for so long had melted away, thawed by Oliver's steady kindness and the life they had built together. Her labor began on a cold December morning, 3 weeks before the new century would begin. She woke to cramping that she initially dismissed as the false labor she had been experiencing for weeks. But these pains grew stronger, more regular, and by noon she knew it was time. Oliver rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch Dr. Whitley, leaving Clarissa in the capable hands of Margaret, who had insisted on staying at the ranch for the last 2 weeks in anticipation of this moment. By the time Oliver returned with the doctor, Clarissa was deep into labor, walking the floor of the bedroom, breathing through contractions that came hard and fast. Dr. Whitley examined her and looked pleased. "You are progressing well. First babies usually take their time, but this one seems eager to meet the world." Oliver stayed close, holding Clarissa's hand through contractions, supporting her when she needed to walk, wiping her face with cool cloths. His fear was evident in his tense shoulders and pale face, but he did not leave her side. As evening fell, the labor intensified. Clarissa labored on her hands and knees, then standing, then finally settled in the bed as the urge to push became overwhelming. Margaret supported her shoulders while Oliver held one leg and Dr. Whitley the other, coaching her through each push. "I can see the head," Dr. Whitley announced. "One more good push, Mrs. Quinn." Clarissa bore down with all her strength, feeling the burning stretch, and suddenly there was release and the sound of an infant crying. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. "A boy," Dr. Whitley said, holding up the squalling baby. "A healthy boy." He placed the baby on Clarissa's chest, and she looked down at the tiny red face, the waving fists, the dark hair plastered to his head, and felt her heart expand to encompass this new person. Oliver was crying openly, his hand gently touching the baby's back, his face transformed with joy and relief. "We have a son," he whispered. "Clarissa, we have a son." They named him Owen Matthias Quinn, Owen for Oliver's father and Matthias for Clarissa's. He was a lusty nurser, a vigorous crier, and from the beginning possessed of a strong will. The first weeks were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of new parenthood, but also suffused with a deep joy. Oliver proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Owen when he fussed, changing nappies without complaint, singing soft cowboy songs in his rough voice to soothe the baby to sleep. Clarissa watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love with this man who had taken a chance on a frozen, frightened woman and made her his wife. As winter settled in around them, they became a family. Neighbors dropped by with gifts and advice. Joseph's family brought a beautiful cradle board decorated with beadwork. Margaret knitted endless tiny hats and booties. Dr. Whitley checked on them weekly at first, then monthly, pronouncing Owen thriving and Clarissa recovered. The new century arrived with little fanfare in their remote corner of Alaska. They were too busy with a 6-week-old baby to pay much attention to the turning of the calendar. But on January 1st, 1900, Clarissa stood holding Owen while Oliver stood behind her, his arms around them both, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "A new century," she said. "A new beginning." "Every day with you is a new beginning," Oliver said, kissing her temple. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch work continued, adjusted now to accommodate an infant. Clarissa began seeing patients again when Owen was a few months old, bringing him with her wrapped snugly against her chest. The native women especially appreciated this, finding it natural and right that a mother would keep her baby close. Owen grew rapidly, a healthy, happy baby who smiled easily and seemed fascinated by everything. By the time summer arrived, he was sitting up and trying to crawl. By autumn, he was walking and getting into everything. Oliver built gates to keep him safe and away from the stove, and Clarissa spent her days chasing after their active son. The following winter was easier than the first, Clarissa now familiar with the challenges of Alaska cold. Owen caught a minor cold in February, causing 2 days of anxiety but recovered quickly. In the spring, when he was 18 months old, they took him to see the ocean for the first time. He was delighted by the waves, laughing and trying to chase them, and they spent a happy afternoon on the beach collecting shells and watching seabirds. That summer, Clarissa realized she was pregnant again. This time the announcement was met with pure joy from Oliver, his earlier fears quelled by Owen's successful arrival. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was chasing a toddler and had no time to dwell on worries. Their daughter arrived in March of 1901, during a late spring snowstorm. The labor was faster than with Owen, only 6 hours from start to finish, and Dr. Whitley barely arrived in time. Catherine Rose Quinn was smaller than her brother had been, with a cap of reddish hair and green eyes that looked just like Clarissa's. Owen, not quite 2, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, to hold her, to share his toys with her. Clarissa had to watch him carefully to make sure his enthusiastic affection did not overwhelm the tiny infant. With 2 children, the house felt truly full. The work was harder, the nights more broken, but the joy was exponentially greater. Oliver would come in from the fields to find Clarissa nursing Catherine while Owen played at her feet, and the sight would stop him in his tracks, overcome with gratitude for his life. 3 years passed in a blur of childhood milestones and seasonal rhythms. Owen grew tall and sturdy, already showing signs of his father's build. Catherine was more delicate but possessed a fiery temperament that kept everyone on their toes. They added a 3rd child in 1903, another boy they named Henry, and then a 4th and final child in 1905, a girl they called Lydia. The ranch prospered. Oliver's reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing brought him steady business. Clarissa's skills as a healer were sought throughout the region, and though she could not travel as much with 4 young children, people came to her. She treated everything from broken bones to difficult coughs, learning constantly, becoming more skilled with each patient. Nome grew around them, becoming more established, less of a wild frontier camp and more of a proper town. A real church was built and a school. Roads improved. The gold rush faded, but enough people stayed to make a viable community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Oliver took Clarissa to the same beach where they had brought Owen as a toddler. The children were home with Margaret, giving them a rare day alone. They walked along the shore, hand in hand, watching the waves roll in from the Bering Sea. "Do you ever regret it?" Oliver asked. "Leaving Boston, coming all this way, living such a hard life." Clarissa stopped and turned to face him, studying his dear, familiar face, lined now with the years but still handsome to her eyes. "Not for a single moment. This life with you, with our children, it is everything I never dared to hope for. You saved me, Oliver. You gave me back myself." "You saved me too," he said. "I was half alive before you came, just going through the motions. You brought me back to life, made me whole again." He pulled her close and kissed her, a deep kiss full of love and passion and a decade of shared life. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "To another 10 years, Clarissa said. "To another 50, Oliver countered. They walked further, talking about their children, their dreams for the future, the possibility of expanding the ranch or perhaps opening a proper medical clinic in town. The afternoon sun sparkled on the water and seabirds wheeled overhead, and Clarissa felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. The years continued to unfold. Owen grew into a young man, tall and capable, working alongside his father on the ranch. Catherine proved to have a gift for healing like her mother, often accompanying Clarissa on calls. Henry was the quiet one, happiest with books and building things. Lydia was the wild child, always into mischief, full of laughter and energy. In 1910, when Alaska was becoming more connected to the lower states, Owen fell in love with a young woman named Emily, who had come north with her family seeking opportunity. Clarissa watched her eldest son court this girl with all the nervousness and earnestness of young love, and she saw echoes of herself and Oliver in their tentative steps toward each other. Owen and Emily married in 1911, a joyful celebration that brought together the entire community. Clarissa cried watching her son pledge his life to this woman, remembering her own wedding day in Margaret's store, the simple ceremony that had changed everything. Grandchildren arrived in due course. Owen and Emily had 3 children in quick succession. Catherine married a doctor who came to Nome to work with her mother, recognizing a kindred spirit in the healer woman who had no formal training but whose practical knowledge surpassed many with degrees. Henry became a builder, helping construct the growing town. Lydia married a teacher and surprised everyone by settling down and becoming a devoted mother. Through it all, Oliver and Clarissa remained at the center, the foundation upon which this expanding family was built. They grew older together gracefully, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and harsh climate, but their love for each other never diminishing. On a summer evening in 1920, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, now much expanded from the simple cabin it had been when Clarissa first arrived. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their voices high and sweet in the endless daylight. Owen was managing the ranch now, though Oliver still helped when his aging body allowed. Clarissa had finally trained a successor, a young native woman named Nuna who showed great aptitude for healing. 21 years, Oliver said, rocking slowly in his chair. "Since you stepped off that stage, coach, frozen and frightened." 21 years since you said you would thaw my worry away," Clarissa replied, reaching over to take his hand. "And you did. You thawed all my fears, all my pain, all the frozen parts of my heart." "You did the same for me," he said. I was frozen in grief, and you brought me back to warmth, to life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun that would not set for hours yet, listening to their grandchildren laugh. The life they had built together spread out before them in the form of family, community, legacy. "No regrets?" Oliver asked, as he had asked before over the years. "Not a single one," Clarissa replied, as she always did. "You, only that I did not find you sooner," he said. "But I will take the years we have had and be grateful." That night, lying in the bed they had shared for over 2 decades, Clarissa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that frozen, frightened girl who had arrived with nothing but desperation and a false photograph, to this woman, loved and respected, surrounded by family, having built a life of meaning and purpose. The fear that had defined her youth was so distant now it felt like it had happened to someone else. She thought of her younger self sometimes, that girl trapped in her uncle's house, being force-fed and mocked, believing herself worthless. If she could speak to that girl, she would tell her to hold on, to be brave, to trust that somewhere in the vast world there was a place for her, a person who would see her value, a life worth living. Oliver's arm tightened around her in his sleep, and she snuggled closer to his warmth. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had been brave enough to reach for and lucky enough to find. The years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. There were sorrows, the inevitable losses that come with a long life. Margaret passed in 1922, leaving a hole in their lives but also countless good memories. Joseph died in 1924, and his family gathered to mourn a good man who had lived well. Oliver's health began to fail in his late 60s. A weak heart, the doctor said, and he had to give up the heavy ranch work entirely. But there were far more joys than sorrows. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. The family grew into a sprawling clan, all of them rooted in the love that Oliver and Clarissa had built together. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, gathered for holidays, supported each other through hard times. In 1925, on their 26th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a surprise celebration. The entire community gathered at the church, now a substantial building with a real bell tower, to honor the couple who had become such a fixture of Nome life. Oliver and Clarissa, both moving slowly now with age, walked into the church to find it packed with people. There were speeches honoring Oliver's integrity as a businessman and cattleman, Clarissa's skill and compassion as a healer. There were funny stories and touching tributes. There was a cake and music and dancing. When it was Oliver's turn to speak, he stood with Clarissa at his side, looking out at all the faces, so many of them family, so many of them friends. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice still strong despite his age, "but I want to say this. 26 years ago, a woman arrived in Nome on a winter day, frozen and frightened. I took one look at her and saw something that maybe she did not even see in herself. I saw strength and courage and heart. I married her, and it was the best decision I ever made. Clarissa, you have been my partner, my lover, my best friend. You have given me children and grandchildren and a life richer than I ever imagined possible. You thawed my frozen heart, and I have been warm ever since." There was not a dry eye in the church. Clarissa stood and kissed him gently, then turned to address the crowd herself. "When I came here, I was running away from a life that had become unbearable. I thought maybe I could find work, find some way to survive. I never imagined I would find love, family, purpose, home. Oliver gave me all of that. He saw past my size, past my fear, past all the things the world told me made me unworthy. He saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he found. Our children, our grandchildren, all of you, you are the fruits of that love. Thank you for celebrating with us today." The party continued late into the evening, with people sharing food and stories and laughter. Clarissa watched her great-grandchildren play, tiny ones just learning to walk, and marveled at how far one brave choice had carried her. As she and Oliver finally returned home in the soft midnight sun, exhausted but happy, she thought about all the frozen, frightened people out there, trapped in lives that diminished them, afraid to reach for something better. She wished she could tell them all to be brave, to take the chance, to trust that somewhere, somehow, there might be someone ready to help them thaw. The seasons turned. Oliver's heart grew weaker, and by early 1926 he was largely confined to the house. Clarissa nursed him tenderly, as she had nursed so many others over the years, but this was different. This was the man she loved, the father of her children, her partner of 27 years. Watching him decline was the hardest thing she had ever done. On a bright March morning, with spring just beginning to touch the Alaskan landscape, Oliver woke and asked to sit outside. Their sons carried him to the porch in his chair, wrapped him in blankets, and left him there with Clarissa. They sat hand in hand, watching the sunlight sparkle on the melting snow. "It has been a good life," Oliver said, his voice thin but content. "Better than I deserved." "Better than either of us dared to hope for," Clarissa corrected. "We built it together." "Promise me something," he said, turning to look at her. "Do not mourn too long. You have always been a healer, always helped others. Keep doing that, keep living fully." "I promise," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "but I will miss you every day." "And I will be waiting for you," he said. "When your time comes, I will be waiting. We will have eternity together." He closed his eyes, still holding her hand, and simply did not open them again. His breathing slowed, became shallow, then stopped. Clarissa sat with him for a long time, holding his hand as it grew cold, saying goodbye to the man who had saved her, loved her, built a life with her. The funeral was huge, the church overflowing with people whose lives Oliver had touched. He was laid to rest in the cemetery overlooking the sea, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clarissa stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said her final farewell to her husband. The grief was immense, a heavy weight that settled over everything. But she had promised Oliver she would keep living, and she was a woman who kept her promises. She continued her healing work, found comfort in her children and grandchildren, and slowly the grief became something she could carry rather than something that buried her. She lived another 8 years, growing frail but remaining sharp-minded until the end. She was surrounded by family, loved and cherished, when she passed peacefully in her sleep in June of 1934 at the age of 58. Her children laid her to rest beside Oliver, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. At her funeral, Owen stood to speak about his mother. He told the story he had heard many times, of the frozen, frightened woman who had arrived in Nome in 1899, and the cowboy who had promised to thaw her worries away. He spoke of the love his parents had shared, the family they had built, the legacy they had left. "My father saw my mother when no one else did," Owen said. "He saw her strength and her worth, and he loved her for exactly who she was, and my mother loved him back with equal devotion. They built this family on a foundation of love and respect and partnership. They showed us all how to love well, how to live well, how to treat each other with kindness. We are who we are because of them." The family gathered after the service, spanning 4 generations now, all of them connected back to that frozen day in 1899, when a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy took a chance on each other. They told stories, shared memories, and celebrated a life well lived. In the years that followed, the story of Oliver and Clarissa became something of a legend in Nome. It was told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, becoming part of the family mythology. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding to what Oliver and Clarissa had started. The house was preserved, becoming a gathering place for family celebrations. The bedroom where Catherine and the other children had been born, the kitchen where countless meals had been shared, the porch where Oliver and Clarissa had sat on that last day together. All of it was maintained lovingly as a testament to the love that had been lived there. And in the cemetery overlooking the Bering Sea, two headstones stood side by side. One read Oliver Quinn, 1870–1926, beloved husband and father. The other read Clarissa Quinn, 1876–1934, beloved wife and mother, healer of bodies and hearts. Between them, carved into both stones, was a simple phrase that captured the essence of their story. Love thaws all. Their story was proof that even in the harshest environment, even in the most unlikely circumstances, love could flourish. That a frozen, frightened woman and a grieving cowboy could find each other across thousands of miles and build something beautiful and lasting. That kindness and courage in taking a chance on each other could change everything. Every winter, when the first big snow fell on Nome, someone in the family would tell the story again. They would speak of Clarissa stepping off that stagecoach, terrified and cold, and Oliver's simple promise to thaw her worries away. They would talk about the life that grew from that moment, the family that stemmed from that brave choice, the love that warmed even the coldest Alaskan night. And the children listening would learn that love is not about perfect circumstances or perfect people. It is about seeing someone truly, accepting them fully, and choosing to build a life together. It is about courage in the face of fear, kindness in the face of cruelty, hope in the face of despair. It is about two people, each frozen in their own way, finding warmth in each other and building a fire that would burn for generations. The legacy of Oliver and Clarissa Quinn lived on in every member of their family, in every act of kindness, in every brave choice, in every love freely given. They had started with nothing but hope in each other, and from that small beginning had grown something vast and enduring. Their love story became a beacon, a reminder that it is never too late to change your life, never too late to find love, never too late to be brave. That the most profound transformations often begin with a single act of kindness, a hand extended to someone frozen and frightened, an offer to thaw their worries away. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, two souls who had found each other in the frozen wilderness of Alaska continued their journey together, warmed by a love that not even death could diminish. They had promised each other forever, and forever was exactly what they got.